Hey everybody, welcome. I am here in Maya 2017 and I just want to give you guys an update to some new features this year in Maya's UV editor. So what I have right now is our blade and hilt from the previous video, and you can notice that it's completely modeled and I have no n-gons and the scale is scaled appropriately. I have each of my pieces set up on display layers. You can find this file in the UV start _04 file. And let's hop in and let's see what the difference is this year in the UV editor. So this is going to be a little different if you're working off of Maya 16 or below. But when we go to the UV editor, we actually end up seeing a few different things. What Maya has done is basically made a toolkit, much like the modeling toolkit here, but a UV toolkit to kind of work with UVs. And at first it can be a bit confusing because what you're missing are all your hotkey buttons, and there's no menu up here like it previously was. Now this version of the UV editor comes in the third update. Currently we're on a fourth update, I believe, in Maya 2017 when I made this video. So on the third update, it will change your UV editor drastically. So any of you who've updated and look at this and go, oh my gosh, this is going to kind of help you guide through that. So all the same functions are there. We're gonna, it's actually quite a little bit easier to approach. So let's start by just starting with one of the easier parts of our model. We're gonna go ahead and turn off everything but our blade here. Now in previous videos, what we've learned is we wanna take a picture of it. Right now we have no UVs. This shape and this shape don't match. But what we do have here is some display settings. So let's talk about those first and foremost before we get into all this stuff over here. I'm going to actually close these down a little bit. So here you can see we can turn on and off the wireframe. We can go to shaded mode. This is the mode I actually prefer. We have a distortion mode that will show red where the most distortion is on your UVs. Obviously, we have a lot of distortion going on, so I'm going to turn that little box off. Any of these boxes, if you hold the shift key and hit the left mouse button, you'll open an option box so you can change the appearance. Here we have the texture borders. I like to have those on. They give me nice white lines around the shells. We have the shell borders we can turn on and off as well. We have our grid. Now, on some machines by default, most people's grids can look like this. So I'm going to hold shift and I'm going to hit my left mouse button. And I'm going to go ahead and kind of change some settings here. I've noticed on some of, especially the lab computers, that we get this kind of endless grid, which is great, but it can be a little overwhelming. So I'm going to go ahead and hit shift left mouse button again. Go ahead and make your length and width 1. The grid lines, you want to have every point 1, and you want 2 subdivisions. And then I have axis on, grid lines on, and I have tile lines on as well. And the grid numbers are on the axis. So make sure these settings are, you can kind of pause the video and maybe take a note of them so you can check them with your own. But I'm going to hit apply and close, and it gives me a nice 4-panel grid. So that's helpful. What we have here is an isolate select view, so we can kind of isolate individual shells when we start working with more, so we're not overwhelmed by pieces. And then a really great addition, we have the UV snapshot. Has a hotkey button now, so we can go ahead and export these UVs to work in other programs. If we keep moving forward, we have our texture mode on and off, and we have our UV test grid, so we can turn those. I usually turn my mountain view off, but I turn my checkerboard button on so you can see all the distortion in there. And we can kind of save some of the image beneath it. If we do choose to turn it on, you can see if you had an image in there, you could play with it. If you have a texture that you're trying to put on the image from a file, you can go ahead and select that texture here. Other than that, though, you can see that many of the options still are here, but they've kind of like hid them in these little shelves. So you really don't need to do much here. But what is new is the ability to add custom buttons using the Control-Shift-Click technique. So let's go ahead before we get going and add some familiar buttons. So we can go down each one and find buttons that we typically use a lot. So in the edit category, I don't really copy or paste UVs, so I'm going to just avoid these. let's go down create. In create, I do use mapping, but I do it a different way, so we don't really need to add anything here. Maybe we can add an automatic map if you want, but I'm going to leave those blank. In select, you can see we have all new selection buttons. Now, all of these options here are actually listed over here to the right as well, so keep that in mind. Cut and sew. Cut is one I use quite often, so I can hold that Control Shift and click on that to create that button. Sew as well. You can do the same thing. And then I have a move and sew as well, so I can start adding these buttons. And to do that, I'm holding Control and Shift, or Command and Shift on a Mac. Some things I use quite frequently, the flip tool under Modify. So Control, Shift, and I'm going to click the flip tool. I use the rotate very religiously, so Control, Shift, left click, add that to my shelf. And there's some really cool tools in here we'll get into in a second, but let's go down here to the bottom and let's go to Unfold and Control Shift, and that is a very important one too. Here in the tools, we don't need hotkeys for these, but we may want to use tools like previous tools like the Smooth tool. That would be a really great one, so I can go ahead and add that. And we can add the other Unfold tool as well, just in case. Now, the difference is there's a few differences. This is a bit of a different unfold, so we'll go ahead. That's more of a brush unfold, so I'm going to add that too. In the view mode, I'm okay with this. The custom shelf should be turned on, so if you don't see that, go to View Custom Shelf. What we have here is some of the displays and ratios. You don't really need to mess with that. The texture we currently have is that default checkerboard, and everything else is pretty much set. Now, looking at the UVs, again, I told you guys it could be overwhelming when you don't see all the familiar buttons. And if you open up all these drawers, you can see, wow, there's quite a few selections and elements that you can use to create UVs. So rather than going through each one, let's go ahead and stick to the method we know. Now, one of the methods we know is to arrange your picture or your model on one side and your UV on the other. So I want to take a picture of this from the top down. I'm going to hold my Shift key and right click and go to Mapping and take a picture, Planar Map Y. Now at first glance it doesn't look so hot, but I'm going to scale this to what I feel is appropriately the size of my my actual sword blade, and until I get squares in my UV. Now I rarely look at this right off the bat. I'm only looking to see if I can get my squares. And it's not perfect. It's actually not too bad, but the sides are a little distorted. And the reason I'm getting this color, just like in the last video, is that this purple means that's overlapping. So what I want to do is treat this like it was a fish. I want to fillet it. So I'm going to cut it in half. So to do that, I'm going to right click and go to Edge Mode. And when I'm in Edge Mode, I'm going to double click on an edge, which will grab the contiguous loop of that edge. And you can kind of see, let's see if we can zoom in here. If we double click there, it's grabbed it all the way down, all the way to this way. And now, rather than getting caught up in all these different pieces, let's use the method we know. We have the cut tool up here, but we can also hold in our UV editor Shift and then drag to cut. Then we can right click and go to UV shell, hit W, and move them apart. So all those tools are still there. Here, it's red because it's flipped upside down. Now we have our flip tool right here, which makes for an easy flip. And now we have our two shells. Now we can continue the same process as we did in the other videos. So we can use our tools going to UV, grab our UVs. We could do the unfold tool, so we could hold Shift, right click, unfold, and that will kind of unfold it. We can do the same here for the bottom. Shift, right click, unfold, and then that's going to work out some of the kinks, so to speak. And what we do have that kind of helps is we have a lot more alignment and arranging tools. So for instance, if I want to deal with like layout, I can now hold Shift, right click, and I can lay these out along the V axis, or I can lay this out along the U axis, and I can get a very nice organized straight up and down feel. So I can even grab the shell here and check this out. Shift, right click, hold both down, go to layout, and then layout U, and then I can hit my rotate here, go to my E key, and I can rotate that straight. And so it becomes an actual really intuitive way to lay out UVs. And what you'll notice is you're going to kind of not use as much of these buttons as you think. You're going to use those hotkey methods. So just kind of keep that in mind as you progress forward. Now, tools that still are around, like I mentioned, are the unfold brush. So if we want to grab an area and grab all the UVs, so I right click and go to UV mode. If I highlight those, I have that unfold brush, and if I hold the B as in brush key and my left mouse button, I can actually paint out distortion of those UVs. So that's the same way as we used to click on the word unfold and drag it back and forth. This is just a brush version of that, and it works rather well. So that's also available if we go to the unfold tool up here. You can go back to the old way where you can see that old method. And I went ahead and added this unfold tool to my shelf, pardon me, and that was found over here. So that's that control unfold tool. So something to keep in mind that, you know, when you add them, the old tools still are there. So by adding these tools, we have the ability to basically continue to do what we want. There are some newer, cooler features in. One of my favorites is actually the stack tool. So we can go to arrange and layout. You can actually, for certain ones, you can stack shells now on top, as pending they're the same size. And that's really, really neat. You can align things. You can align their centers and whatnot. So also very cool. But you can see it's not too much different in general than what we had in the past versions of Maya here. And at any point, you know, you can kind of turn on and off specific things and just kind of go through the same methods and really work out the pieces. So let's do one more piece, and then I'll leave you guys to it to kind of match the area. Let's do that hilt. Everyone's always really terrified of UVing the hilt for some reason. But as I drag off my piece by accident here, let me go back to single mode. There we go. I'm in Windows, so my Windows machine likes to give me all sorts of fun options. So let me drag that up there. There we go. And let's do this. Let's reset my Maya workspace. So let's go back to Maya Classic, reset current workspace. Now we're back, and we'll open back up our UV editor. Perfect. All right. So what we can do is open the hilt, close the rest, and the hilt again can be a tricky piece, but let's take it one step at a time. First, we need to take a picture of it, right? So we right-click, mapping, and we're going to take a picture from Y, which is top down. This looks pretty good, looks familiar. We're going to go to edge mode, and we're going to double-click. And what we want to do is select that edge loop. You can see here, so if we double-click here, and then we double-click that edge loop, we can kind of start removing these items. So shift right-click, cut. And remember, when you cut one, you got to grab more than one edge loop. So after you cut that one, grab one here, and let's cut out the middle one while we're at it. Just hit F out here. Double click, shift right click, cut. Go back to right click shell mode. And the more you cut these edges, the more you'll start to be able to see them release. And let me get this from the start here. I must have missed an edge somewhere. All right, let's go back to object mode here, and let's turn off our grid because we're just cutting. And let's do a cut here. And let's go to shell mode. There we go. Now we're starting to separate them. And then we have that top version, which is great. And then here we have the bottom version. So let's cut this bottom piece out. Double click, shift, double click, cut. And it's still missing one little piece here. But totally manageable. So what we can also do is cut it right here. There we go. Perfect. So then we have this area in the middle. So now what we can start doing is using our unfold tool. So what I can do is start attempting to unfold this by grabbing the UVs, doing unfold, and you can see it gives me a pretty decent shape. I'm actually going to cut some of these estranged edges right here. So I'm going to zoom in rather good and maybe cut like this little edge here. And then make these into two shells. Cut that little edge there. You can see now I've kind of cut them. They look like little mustaches. And then we can continue to move forward. So we'll grab these. And we'll do a unfold. That's great. We may have to do the same thing. And it's not always going to work the same way depending on your model. So what you just got to do is have patience and realize, sometimes you got to disassemble it, take it apart like I'm doing, before you can kind of get that final result. So what I just did is cut those pieces apart. Perfect. And then we're going to probably have to do the same thing here. Unfold. Oh yeah. And we'll cut there and there. Cut there. And there. Now this little guy should be unhooked. So should this person. And now we can start having fun. So at this point, we can start sewing these back together. We can use our tools like we talked about before. So we can go in here in UV mode and use our old school unwrap tool. So we can start doing that. We can actually unfold these again if need be. So that will kind of bring us back to where we had it. But we can start sewing these together too. So if I zoom in very close, and let's grab edge mode, grab an edge up here, and grab an edge up here. There we go. Shift right click, move and sew. You can start to see, we can start piecing these back together and then just kind of going through the process that we've used before and kind of unfolding these and stretching them, using our unfold tool if need be, and start getting that basic shape. We also have that unfold brush that we can go into and we can scale bigger and start kind of manipulating these where we see fit. So you would continue to do that until you get the shape that you want. If you mess up, shift right click, start over, just take a picture again. And that's the great thing about doing UVs like this, is that you can grab anything, and when you're done, if you don't like what you have, you simply map it again and kind of work your way through. But those same tools are there. The same method is there. So you can see I'll add it here and here. This must have been the little guy that I missed last time. Cut that down. That looks really good. And there it is. Look at that. I missed this edge. Perfect. So cut it, have the shell, and we can start peeling these away, which is really cool. And we can do an unfold to get it a little wider, and then continue to kind of move and sew. So go ahead and use these tools. You kind of know where they are now, and you can kind of, go through and do the same methods of layout that you saw in the other video. But just remember, they all are here. You just have to kind of look for them. And making your shelf ahead of time is going to be really helpful for you, because that will kind of eliminate some of the guesswork that you have to do. So hopefully this updates you on the UV editor. Look forward to seeing your projects and hearing your questions. Thanks.